We all want things to change, especially at work. From the intern to the HR director, from the CEO to the line worker, at subsidiaries or at the head office. It would be fantastic if the company was more agile, more innovative, if managers were more supportive, if employees were more proactive. And yet, change is often a disappointment. It's slow, it's costly, it rarely achieves the objectives we aim for. So, what's going on and what can we do about it? It happens that we have changed times. We are no longer the people that our grandparents or even our parents were. Our expectations have changed as customers, as employees, as citizens, and yet organizations still work the same way as in the past. Even our conception of leadership is a little bit obsolete, so they no longer serve us. So what can be done? I suggest 4 moves, not steps, because I believe linear approaches are too simplistic for our complex reality. 4 moves: self-emancipate, connect, mobilize, unlead. Move 1, self-emancipate. What does it mean? It's about questioning current practices and how we perpetuate them. We are caught in mental models, in thought patterns that seem so normal that we don't even see them. It's about taking a step back, not necessarily throwing away, everything we've done in the past, but taking a step back and observing what we do that replicate, that perpetuate those thought patterns that limit, that restrict the capacity for change. Those thought patterns and mental models we've reproduced are very much influenced by the mechanistic approach to organizations, the separation of thinking and doing, the attribution of better judgment to senior leadership, the binary, linear, sequential thinking. All that does no longer serve us. And when we try to transform people into robots, or when we try to improve performance through standard operating procedures, through more processes, through more structure, we can only make organizations go slower, and it's costly and it's not effective. Another thought pattern that is also obsolete and that we maintain is our approach to leaders. We still believe that leaders are those who display, strength, assurance, charisma, who stand above others, and this is very, very outdated. We'll come back to that. To overcome that, it is really important to see systems. System sight, as Barry Oshry says, is the source of empowerment. So we need to take a step back and look at the system in which we operate. Why is it important? A bad system will beat a good person every time. At one point in my career, I faced an issue which I thought was related to me, and then I realized, taking a step back, that it was actually not just related to me, but it was a very systemic issue. And seeing systems opened up new possibilities for change. Organizations are not machines. They are living systems. And it's important to learn how living systems work if we want to understand how change can be effective in our organizations. Even in organizations that would appear as well-oiled machines, like the army, for example, the garden is now becoming a preferred metaphor. Former US Army General Stanley McChrystal explains in his book, Team of Teams, that nurturing the environment, nurturing the organization has become more relevant than the chess move that he usually referred to in the past. Considering organizations as living systems has important consequences on how we address change. For example, if we focus on changing the structure, changing the department, who reports to whom, etc., if we focus on processes, if we focus on procedures, all this is doomed to fail. Why? Because processes, procedures, organization, structure, etc., is only the reflection of what happens at a much deeper level, the level of identity, of how the system sees itself, the level of information, how does the information flow in the system, and the level of relationships. What are the relationships in the system? To bring about change in an organization, we actually need to support, nurture, cultivate its aliveness, its capacity to self-organize. And what is aliveness in an organization? It is human agency. That's why talking about employee engagement as satisfaction is actually not relevant. What we need is people to be engaged, to be actively engaged, to be in movement, to be in action, rather than waiting for instructions. People own what they help create. This is a key change principle in living organizations. And that's why we need to co-create much more and much earlier than what is done generally in organizations. Too often, you have a small group of people deciding on what change needs to be done and then pushing it to everybody else and asking them to buy into it or to adopt the change. But it doesn't work because you have not created ownership. You have not made sense. You have not created common ground around what's happening and why is that change and what can be done. A client of mine, the training department of a large organization, had created over the years a very large knowledge database for its employees. But at some point they realized it was not effective because it maintained employees in a state of passivity, consuming knowledge, consuming content, while we need today to learn how to learn, which is very different, very different kind of skill set. So together we worked on an initiative aiming at making people more active, more creators, co-creators of knowledge together with their colleagues. The fact is that change starts with oneself. Change is not just for the others. If I realize that I am part of the problem, then I can be part of the solution. To change an ecosystem, I need to learn new skills. And I also need to unlearn what is not helpful anymore. Unlearn control, unlearn territory, unlearn perfection, for example. And instead learn connection, mobilization, and leadership. I was talking with a group of people who were very keen on self-organization. And at the end of our discussion, I asked them about their next steps. And they said, well, we are going to write a report and ask for permission from our management. I said, what? This is precisely the opposite of what you're trying to do. They had not realized that they were, by asking for permission from the boss, they were precisely maintaining these thought patterns. They were constraining, limiting the capacity for change. Another example is, I discussed recently with a CEO who was thinking about leadership programs for her future leaders and middle managers. She wanted them to take more ownership in change, right? But she was about to download on them a leadership training organized by other people. I asked her whether she had considered a co-creation with the people who were subject to that training, whether they could become actors of their own leadership development. It was an aha moment for her. She realized that through her action, she maintained the sort of passivity among her staff that she was trying to change. So it couldn't work. So now we see the system. We understand our own role in perpetuating or changing it. But alone can feel very powerless. How do we get more impact? 2. Connect. We need to generate new connections to enable the system's better capacity to evolve. Networks are containers of knowledge, and networks are everywhere. They may be invisible or informal, but if we don't intentionally cultivate them, nurture them, then we reduce the capacity of the system to make sense of its environment, to exchange knowledge, to retain this aliveness capacity. Networks are present in the workplace as well, obviously. But you know what? Work is not just what happens in the network. Work is the network. Work is relational. We often think of leadership as a fixed position in the hierarchy, but leadership is actually contextual and relational. So if you don't pay attention to the relationships, to those flows, those connections, if you only look at the task in a separated way, you contribute to the fragmentedness of the system, and therefore you don't augment its capacity to make sense of changes together, to evolve together, and to create engagement and capacity and performance. Networks are not just a reality, a fact. They should be an operating principle. We need to connect the system to more of itself, to increase the overall collective intelligence, to increase its capacity to evolve and react and be agile. We need to connect actors, people, ideas across silos, across levels, across environments, so that the system becomes more intelligent as a whole. You create performance through density and a diversity of networks connected together through quality and meaningful interactions. A diversity of perspectives enriches the identity of the network, and therefore it makes it more able to accept the newness coming from outside, what it doesn't know yet, rather than resist to change. An organization I worked for used to manage its quality in a very segmented, siloed, sequential way. And it's only when we connected the system to more of itself through volunteering networks, for example, that we were able to change how the culture and how people work together. The first volunteer team we got from this, out of this process, gathered people from 7 different hierarchical levels, working together as one team. It had never occurred in the past, because usually organizations solve problems sequentially, layer by layer. And never do they try to connect those different perspectives together. There are many things we can do to connect the system to more of itself. For example, to make use of internal social networks. Social digital networks not only amplify reach, enable to connect people at scale, but they also change and evolve positively the nature of interactions. You cannot maintain a very hierarchical, top-down kind of interaction in an organization that is making a wide use of digital networks. For me, social networks have been absolutely instrumental in getting people together, in creating more knowledge, in creating engagement and visibility, and in simply getting things done. Besides social networks, we should also develop relational skills. Understand that relational skills are part, and maybe the most important part, of leadership. Networks will not necessarily replace the hierarchy, the traditional operating mode of organizations, but they can greatly enhance their effectiveness. John Kotter has explained in a book called Accelerate how the two systems together, connected through a set of processes, can deliver extraordinary results. I have had this experience myself where by complementing a traditional department in an organization with a volunteer network where people are truly volunteer, not voluntold, we were able to create performance that had never been achieved before. Only through the network approach were we able to leverage the latent collective intelligence that was present in the system, but that was poorly used, that was not accessible and not visible. Now, how do we keep the network together? It's a challenge. There are many forces at play for fragmentation, territories, competition, new projects. How do you keep that network together? 3, mobilize. We need to enable togetherness in action to augment the collective capacity, the capacity for change. Togetherness, the sense of we're here together, we're united, we're not going in every direction, we are consistently working for one single goal. This togetherness cannot be engineered from the top. Even if you push very hard, even if you communicate day and night, you do not create a sense of togetherness. It has to come from the people themselves. I believe togetherness gets best created through joint action, people acting together in the service of a shared cause, of a shared purpose. And that's why purpose washing, those purpose statements created in a boardroom or with communication companies do not work. You have to get people together, have a conversation around what is it we want to do? What is really important for us? What matters? I personally experienced the power of togetherness in action in the workplace. One experience was when we gathered a representative sample of a whole ecosystem we needed to engage. We wanted to change the way 10,000 people work together worldwide. And you can't do that by pushing, new instructions or new operating procedures to those 10,000 people. But you can do that by mobilizing them, by creating a movement around a shared intention, around a common cause, a purpose. So for that, we flew in people from different parts of the world, different functions, different ranks, etc. And together we sat down for 2 days and brainstormed around what is it we want to do together? What is it we want to change and for what reason? And that purpose statement issued by the people proved to be a phenomenal magnet to engage the rest of the organization. To support togetherness, we need to make space for emotions. We need to overcome the myth of the purely rational worker. We are not just brains. We do not just need to understand things. When I hear about clarification, it's all important. But we are also hearts and souls, and this needs to be activated as well. So we need to stop trying to turn people into robots. We need to stop promoting exclusively those who seem to be lacking the most emotional and relational skills. It's great to have great analysts or financial experts or whatever strategists, but we need to cultivate those relational capacities, those relational skills, emotional skills that enable to bond people together, to connect the network to more of itself through the power of emotions. Let's open up to the emotional side of any topic we want to address in the workplace. For example, quality can be made interesting and lively and fun, etc. It doesn't make it less serious, but it makes it more enjoyable. And if it's more enjoyable, then people are more likely to come and support and commit and take a stance. Let's learn from social activism. Social movements enable people to get together and act together. It creates this togetherness in action without the need for extensive and costly communication or control infrastructure. And that's where we can import a lot of its dynamics and patterns in the workplace to benefit organizations' performance. Movements overcome the traditional deficiencies of organizations in innovation, in collaboration, and in engagement. The experience of activism increases human agency, which organizations badly need to increase their performance. Once you've been an activist, you've expanded the space for agency, for impact, for influence. Right? So you've actually gained in leadership, and you've gained in leadership together with others, because activism movements are really about acting together in service of a shared cause. I was profoundly marked by this sentence by Helen Bevan of the NHS, who once said, "We need to strategize change from a social movement perspective." That's it. Exactly. Movements create action, they create togetherness, they create also community. Mary Follett, an early management thinker, used to say that community was a process. I believe it's extremely interesting. Community is not a fixed, geography, something that stands here that you can join or leave. Community is actually a process. The process in which you integrate differences, various viewpoints, various perspectives, and have that stick together, not through uniformity, but through shared desire, shared will. One of the communities that is dear to my heart is the Oscar Kilo community, founded by the British police, which I supported. The challenge here was huge. It was to change the culture of a 200,000 people strong organization so that people who feel not so good can express their feelings and can get support from colleagues rather than commit suicide. Of course, the challenge was already identified by the organization, and it was addressed in a very traditional way, until some people feel that a community engagement approach would make sense. And so they got together, they leveraged internal social networks, they developed peer coaching and connected the system to more of itself. Instead of relying on a single point for support, for communication, people could rely on everybody else, because there was a community of people wanting to help each other, and that makes a big difference. The beauty of community engagement is that it does not only produce performance, which it does, but it also builds social capital. It builds trust. It builds more relationships. It enables people to be more intensely present for each other, to truly see the other. That's from Barry Oshry. And truly seeing the other, that means maintaining our differences, but being able to connect across those differences and seeing other people as peers, even as friends, makes the whole system more resilient and more able to go through whatever crisis or disruption it has to face. I worked with a company on community engagement, and we had a meeting after a few months to reflect on our learning. And in that meeting, one of the volunteers expressed his surprise, saying about his leaders, "I realized they were humans just like us." Imagine if that perception was present in the whole organization. If instead of looking at each other as colleagues or even as enemies sometimes, which happens, people in the other department, people above, people below, people whatever, what if we saw each other as co-activists? So mobilizing to create togetherness in action is amazing. From a performance standpoint, from a human standpoint, from a social impact standpoint. But how do you make that sustainable? To make this new way of working last, to make it produce results over time, we need to embrace a practice of leadership that makes it possible, that makes all this possible, which is engagement leadership, or unleadership in a way. Traditionally, leadership is seen as a skill set that some people master well, others not so well. It's linked to confidence, to assertiveness. It puts some people above others. And it's comfortable. We know who to blame. When things go wrong, we blame the bad leader. And often the leader blames people reporting to him or her for not being good enough. But this forgets the collective dimension of leadership. It actually prevents the evolution of our systems towards a more collectively held leadership competence. A senior executive complained to me recently saying, "It's hard to find good leaders." And I thought, it's not so hard, actually. It's only hard if you look for those extraordinary individuals in the old leadership approach I just described. But if you consider leadership as a collective capacity to be nurtured, to be developed and built, it's not hard. You can start now to develop a whole community of leaders. And indeed, the primary task of leadership is to create collective capacity. From his experience with movements, Marshall Gans, a very famous community organizer, says leadership is accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose in the face of uncertainty. A sports analogy with this kind of leadership can be found, for example, in rowing, which is a sport I've been practicing for 20 years with passion. In rowing, you have this collective dynamics. Of course, we're all here in the same boat, but we're also fueled by the common desire for the perfect stroke. And we have to have this sensory openness because we communicate with each other without speaking. So we have to be open to our bodily sensations, to feel the team. We're not using language. And the sports is also about continuous and humbling self-development. Because if you don't work on yourself first, you cannot contribute to the team. From there, we can identify the traits of engagement leadership or engagement-inducing leadership. What kind of leadership produces engagement? Well, it's leadership seen as a collective capacity. It's leadership seen as emotional fluency, the capacity to relate, to connect with others. And it's leadership seen as self-effacing work. If I make the group, the community strong enough to operate without me, then I can move on and contribute to more communities. That's real leadership today. It's not standing above, being the hero, being the savior, being above everybody else, right? It's enabling community to thrive through aliveness and self-organization so that organizations can perform better economically and socially. Personally, I have never felt more a leader than when I shared decision-making with many other people. Well, we can develop actions and behaviors along pathways of emancipation, of connection, of mobilization, matching our context. Each context is different. We can join communities because remember, you do not affect a system from outside, otherwise you are perceived as a threat. You need to be inside a system to be able to influence it for change. Let's be very aware that our role as leaders is not to create dependency, is not to suck up responsibility to ourselves, but to inject responsibility in the system. As leaders, we are here to enable, not to empower. Empowering means I give you power and I can take it back. Enabling the system is very different. And so, for me, a very powerful leadership question is, how can I help? Albert Camus once said, I rebel, therefore we are. If I take a stance to change something that does not work for me, it means it doesn't work for other people as well. I rejoin. I am entering the human community through this act of change by changing the way things work. Let's rebel more in the workplace rather than maintaining those old systems that do not serve us anymore. And let's do that together, because the way we get to the future is the future we get. If we move towards the future in an emancipated, connected, mobilized way, that's the kind of future we will get. And that's the kind of future we deserve for our organizations and for ourselves.